Welcome to Influential Entrepreneurs, bringing you interviews with elite business leaders and experts, sharing tips and strategies for elevating your business to the next level. Here's your host, Mike Saunders.
Hello and welcome to this episode of Influential Entrepreneurs. This is Mike Saunders, the Authority Positioning Coach. Today we have with us Jonathon Hensley, who's the co-founder and CEO of Emerge and the author of the book Alignment: Overcoming Internal Sabotage and Digital Product Failure. Jonathon, welcome to the program.
Mike, it's a pleasure to be on the program again.
Yeah, I remember talking to you last time, and we talked all about your company, and now you've come out with a brand new book, so we want to dive into that and learn about what was on your mind and needed to get out to teach people in this book. So give us a little bit of background, catch us up to speed on what you've been doing since our last interview, and then what led you to think, this is a topic that now needs to have a book connected to it.
Sure. Well, since we last connected, I've been, busy continuing to help product leaders and organizations bring their new products and services to market, which, as it relates to the book, I became obsessed about maybe 10 years ago with this idea of understanding why so many product initiatives fail and what was the difference between the few that succeeded. And I came across this incredible stat that 84% on average of all digital transformation and product initiatives fail or are underperforming today. And so this idea for a book was really inspired a couple of years ago by that just thirst to understand what is at the root cause of this failure. And I would see clients and peers and friends and these small, incredible startups with passionate founders, or these large Fortune 500 companies struggling to find that success. And I just couldn't help myself. I wanted to understand why. And that led me down this incredible path of 10 years of exploration and interviewing and talking to leaders to understand this idea, which over the last few years culminated into this book, Alignment. And was just released earlier this year.
So when you say alignment, and I see from your table of contents, what is alignment? Then part two, signs of misalignment. So let's identify alignment, and then lead right into a couple of the thoughts of how do you how can you determine if something is heading toward misalignment? Because I know that if I were looking from a 60,000 foot view at a project that went south, there has to be some red flags at some point before, the full crash. So I know that you would be teaching, here's some signs of misalignment. You better handle these before things get totally off the rails.
You're spot on, Mike. So a couple of key things I think is that everybody at a surface level, I think, understands, alignment by just its simple, definition. But when we really pull it apart to understand the deeper meaning of alignment in a business context, and especially from a leadership context, and it doesn't matter if you're a 2-person company or you're a 20,000 person company, they're the same pieces. And if we break it down, these 4 pillars of alignment start with individual alignment. And what that really means is that everybody understands how their work contributes to the goals of the company, how their work matters. And today we want employees to be empowered, and that to understand how you contribute and how you make a difference is so critical. I mean, the average company that has an empowered and engaged employee base is outperforming other companies by 147%. So that individual alignment is just brass tacks good business. And so that's really, really critical. The second one is team alignment, which deals with how we build alignment with others and integrate the unique disciplines and experiences and perspectives of our teams in order to solve problems together, in order to deliver great customer experiences and to fulfill the functions of a business. And that alignment is really critical. The third one is organizational alignment, which really deals with building alignment that reflects the vision of the company and your strategic priorities and the resources you have available that you can deploy to realize those goals. And then the fourth is market alignment, which deals with understanding your customer and not just who they are from like a demographic or user profile, but really what are the problems that your customers have? Why are they hiring your product to solve that problem over another? And what motivates that decision? That's essential to really understanding how we create a connection of value. And so when we hear people talk about authenticity in the market or market fit and connection, fundamentally what's happening beneath that is there's a misalignment at the market. So that becomes an essential discipline in building an aligned approach to achieving incredible business outcomes.
When we're talking or when you were mentioning that, a thought came to mind. So tell me if I'm aligned or if I'm thinking correctly. When you say that you need to lead with, kind of like alignment in mind, leading with alignment, it kind of makes me think, begin with the end in mind. So you need to know where the product in the launch and the end result is headed so that you can be making sure true north is set. Is that a good kind of a launching point on that thought of leading with alignment?
Absolutely. That's perfect. And it's also goes directly to your other question of how do you identify misalignment? Yeah. And the very first thing that we always focus on is understanding, do you have a clearly defined and measurable long-term goal, that North Star, that intended destination identified, and have you organized your company where you've broken down the silos so all parts of the business understand that they contribute to that one thing? And so that's the quickest and easiest way to identify if there's potential for misalignment. And then you can see it symptomatically down the road. It's common in, most things like cost overruns, delayed deadlines. There's a lot of reasons for those, but usually you can find that they're because some key things happened that caused misalignment. And
I love when there's like a commonly known saying that then someone comes and puts a new twist on it. So in this instance, begin with the end in mind. We've heard that for years, and Stephen Covey talked about it in 7 Habits. And then I interviewed someone a few months ago that wrote a book focused on like exit strategy for CEOs. And his book is called End with the Beginning in Mind. And obviously a play on words on the famous quote. But I feel like if you could begin with the end in mind and at the same time make sure that at the end of the project, career, whatever we're talking about, that we are ending with the beginning in mind, boy, doesn't that really, you can just picture in your mind this line with 2 arrows, one on each end, because you're beginning with the end in mind, you're ending with the beginning in mind. And if you are doing that, boy, you're aligned.
100%. It actually, what you just reminded me, Mike, of is a great story. There was an interview in the late 80s with Steve Jobs, and he's confronted by somebody in the audience in this particular conversation about, what is he going to do to continue to move forward in his work? And, we celebrate somebody like Steve Jobs for being a pioneer of innovation and a champion for changing the way that we think about computers and the way that we live and work. But I think what's most interesting when you study Steve Jobs is to understand his failures. His failures are incredible case studies and a wealth of information because they've been done at a very personal, scale. And then he had the skills to learn from those and work backwards to your point with the outcome in mind. And the way he phrased it in that talk, responding to that, was you've got to start with the customer experience and then you work backwards. And that's so powerful if you really understand the meaning and how that built alignment for Apple. I mean, that critical thinking, that was an underpinning, a foundational brick, if you will, to turning Apple back around and into a $1 trillion valuated company. Because what happens is that what they didn't do is they didn't fall into the trap that so many do, where we fall in love with our ideas or the idea of a solution to a problem. He understood that computers no matter how they came in what form, if we could understand that experience and work backwards, we could identify the customer who wanted our product more than anybody else, and that would drive the success of the company.
So when you're, in your book, I'm sure you teach, like, hey, take this step and then take this step and then it leads to this step. That's obvious. It's kind of like an engineering mindset. Give me the checklist or the blueprint, I'll follow it. Well, what do you say to someone that would go, ooh, you know what, steps 4, 7, and 10, they're fine and all and good, but I think I can pop right over them. I think I can go blow through those and kind of shortcut it. What are some dangers of taking shortcuts or skipping steps?
Well, it's ironic that you say that, because when we identified into the research of what are root causes of failure, skipping steps was one of those 8 foundational core reasons of why people become misaligned and initiatives fail. And so you can't skip the step. Now, if you're another way to think about this that I really like is thinking about competency. So if you've been working in an industry for years, over time, you build this incredible competency where you can do things that nobody else can do almost effortlessly. But it took all of that experience and those capabilities to be able to do that. It's like the idea of hitting a golf ball 10,000 times in order to master a shot. Mm. What happens is that those that have that capability, they make these steps look effortless, and it can be an illusion to somebody who hasn't mastered them yet. And they can also move through those steps much faster than anybody else, which can be misunderstood and interpreted. So when you're working with a diverse group of people, which is always ideal, especially when it comes to innovation and delivering great products, is you have to look at the collective competency of everybody involved. And this is why one of the things that we talk about in the book is you have to build a common language, and not just a common language, but a common understanding around these key aspects of your business and what you're doing, so that everybody can move through those steps successfully together. And the collective competence of an organization or a team is the limiting factor or the accelerating factor on the other side of it to how fast and quickly you can move to market and move through those steps to be successful.
Yeah. It seems to me, I love when I hear concepts and thoughts and kind of movement like this, because you hear all the time people talk about the 30,000 foot view, and I feel like this is almost like the 60 or 90,000 foot view, because when you can really take that macro approach to things, problems, initiatives, projects, you can probably fill in the blank. You could probably take your concepts and overlay it over many things, like a product launch, like a engineering problem, or company expansion and scaling up. Do you feel like this now really is like a 30 or 60 or 90,000 foot view, and then you start chunking it down, and then it tells you, if you really worked hard enough at the concept, it's going to tell you what you need to be doing this month and this quarter?
Absolutely. One of the key goals of the book was I wanted something that could empower a CEO of a company, and I could take anybody on a product team and allow them to have a conversation as peers. I needed somebody where you could facilitate that communication upstream as well as downstream to drive alignment and success. And so that idea of starting at that very high level, like 90,000 feet, and then getting all the way to boots on the ground with some of the key concepts in the book was absolutely essential. Yeah. And so we lay out a lot of the foundational pieces to that. I think a really good example of that is, I work with a lot of CMOs and their teams. And one of the things that happens is, we'll be talking about what they're trying to accomplish. Demand generation, driving growth and sales for the, and feeding the sales team for the company, which is an incredibly difficult thing to do, to breaking through that noise, to engaging and putting out that thought leadership, as you well know. And it's an incredible skill to do that well. And one of the challenges that we hear a lot, and you can identify right at the root level is you see a program or a marketing initiative out there, and they're not clear on who that customer is that will truly drive the growth of the company. Or they're not clear on the value proposition that particular customer needs to hear to understand the true value of the product that you spent so much time to create or the service that you offer. And so this challenge of connecting these things is something that every organization deals with. And founders overcome it because of their passion and they're working at small scale. But once you start to scale and you start to have a team or multiple teams, it's so easy to become fragmented. And that's when you get back to that big picture, that 90,000 foot view in the brass tacks. You can't skip the steps in between. You have to keep that going because alignment is not a one-time thing. It's like saying that the vision of your company, once it's written, is the only time you need to worry about it. You just can't do that. The outcome has to be in the forefront.
Yeah. And always, it reminds me of two things. Number one, hey, here's our business plan. We spent months building, and our marketing plan. And it's wonderful. Yay, we high five. And then all of a sudden, we never refer back to it. So it needs to be on the forefront. And secondly, what you just were mentioning made me think of this. It's kind of like an old saying. I love connecting quotes and old sayings and concepts because they really do connect. It's been said, what's easy to do is easy not to do. So I think that some of these things you were mentioning, like, oh, this step and this step, people could tend to skip it because they might view it as like, oh, well, of course. But if it's easy to do, it also is easy not to do. So what would you say to an organization that views some of these steps as like, oh, really? Like the secret to whatever is going to be this many, steps, and they view them as like, well, that's no big deal. But in like sports analogy, don't negate the blocking and tackling. Do the foundational things, and then all the little fun things you can do later. So, what are some thoughts around that?
Yeah, I think. That brings to mind. I think one of the biggest things that I typically see is that planning is confused as strategy.
Oh, yeah.
And so, a company today especially has to be able to be nimble. You have to be able to adapt to your customers' needs or to the market, and dynamics are shifting constantly. And if you follow a plan, you lose track of the North Star. You have no clear decision-making framework. You don't have a way to continue and maintain alignment and making sure that you're continuing to offer your product or service in a distinguishable way from your competition in many cases. And so one thing that we see a lot is why planning is so, misunderstood is that it gives this incredible sense of security. This is what we're going to do at a tactical level, and this is our expected result. But what it really doesn't provide you is the approach, the strategic thinking of, if our customers have this need and we want to get to this place as a business, what's the unique approach and way that we can solve that and then deliver on that? And that might change. And usually plans change. Business plans, become never used again because everything around the assumptions of that business plan changed. And so, Jeff Bezos, has a great quote about, be stubborn on vision and flexible on plans. And there's a reason for that, because the longevity of a good strategy is priceless. But you need to be adaptive. And we get locked into these plannings to get this false sense of security, and then we're constantly disappointed when they don't work out. The other piece to that I think is really tangible is we go through the steps of saying, for example, everybody should use my product, which is already a poor start. Or then we get to a place and say, well, it should be this type of business that is at this size, these kind of demographics. And that's really valuable. But what we really want to know is who has the buying power? In what ways can I connect with those people that have that buying power? What's the predictable behavior and motivations of that buyer? So if I can do that, if I can understand that nuance of my customer, I can have incredibly specific targeted messaging. I can invest into the right channels with the right resources, the right people to connecting with those individuals. And I can make sure, because I understand their motivations, I can make sure they understand the right value points about my product or service that will help them look at it compared to the competition and go, you're the best solution for me. And you see top performing companies again and again and again. The most important insight is about the motivations and behaviors of that customer, whether it's direct consumer or it's B2B, because it's that value connection and understanding what's the exchange and the urgency of that motivation to solve that problem that your product provides.
What you said just a few minutes ago is the customer experience, because when you know the customer and you provide them an experience, meaning it could be a lot of things, but you could have the best product in the world and the best deliverable and ROI and results and all of these things. But if they come to your website, or if you have to call in and talk to a human being, and that first initial experience is just blah, like, oh, your website's clunky, or the person I spoke to was kind of rude, and then all of a sudden they don't even get a chance to experience the next step. Or what if they do get that first step done and in place, and then it's like, oh, you don't communicate with me, or oh, this wasn't done really. That experience is huge.
Yeah, it is. And that's where, if you spend all this time and all this money and effort of making the connection with people, it's so difficult all of a sudden when you see on the other end that they don't keep working with you, or that you lose that connection. So, what's happening there is, well, they didn't connect enough to the value you could provide.
But how do you make sure that they connect?
They understand that the psychological value of their product is safety. So their product, their number one product is safety. It's not the car. And I think that's really powerful. They understand that their vision and their alignment is based on tying everything that they do to this idea of providing and fulfilling the need of families and individuals who want a safe and reliable car. So every single car that they make, every model, in every year of car, no matter what, has to fulfill that promise. They're innovating and they're doing things constantly. The world is changing, to more and more EV cars, and things like that. And everybody's looking for that technical innovation. But why would one company get outperformed by Volvo? Because they're not competing with the other car companies if their core promise isn't tied to safety. Yeah. That's a benefit, but not a promise. And so what happens is that all of a sudden, the leaders of a company like that can completely transform their competitive landscape. And not only does it become about the product, but all of the warranties, the associated services that they provide are focused on reinforcing and delivering that core promise again and again and again. That's working from a place of alignment. Yeah. And that's because they have people involved in the company who have structures and steps that they follow to make sure that that core promise stays in alignment with everything that they do.
Well, I think that we probably covered the preface of the book, in a sense. We could probably talk for another 4.5 more hours and still be taking our first breath. So I want to thank you for coming on, and just ask, what's the best way that someone could reach out and connect with you to pick up a copy of the book and learn more about alignment and overcoming internal sabotage and digital product failure?
Well, if they'd like to get a copy of the book, it's available on Amazon. Also, for anybody listening, if they'd like a free copy of the book, I'd love for them to, and they're interested, especially in digital product, schedule some time with me. Come to emergeinteractive.com, schedule a consultation, and I will be happy to talk to you about the principles, help you with your product or service, and send you a free copy of the book.
Excellent. Well, Jonathon, thank you so much for coming on today. It was a pleasure connecting with you and learning about your new project.
Thank you so much for having me back on the show, Mike. It was great to connect.
You've been listening to Influential Entrepreneurs with Mike Saunders. To learn more about the resources mentioned on today's show or listen to past episodes, visit www.influentialentrepreneursradio.com.